Usually when we talk about the idea that practice makes perfect, there's this massive underlying assumption that we all just sort of blindly accept.
Right, yeah, like
Uh,
it's some universal law of nature or something.
Exactly. I mean, we assumed the practice environment and the actual performance environment are fundamentally the exact same thing. You rehearse a speech in your living room, you memorize the cadence, and then you just go give it on a stage.
And the words don't change.
Right. The words are the same. The physical mechanics of your vocal cords certainly don't change.
Yeah, the expectation is that muscle memory just operates in this vacuum. You build a behavioral script in a low-stakes environment, and you just inherently trust that the script is going to execute identically when the stakes are suddenly, life or death, or at least feel that way.
But then you look at elite sports,
Hmm.
where the margins between winning and losing are just practically microscopic. And suddenly, that whole assumption starts to look incredibly fragile.
Oh, absolutely, it falls apart.
Because we are looking at a landscape where the physical dimensions of the space are identical. The equipment hasn't changed by a single millimeter, but the reality of the performance is completely altered by the context wrapping around it.
It is the absolute definition of a structural illusion. I mean, you look at the table, you look at
Yeah.
the pedals, and you think you are playing the exact same game you played yesterday in practice.
But you're not.
Not at all. The underlying physics and, well, more importantly, the underlying psychology of the competition have actually completely shifted beneath your feet.
Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are exploring exactly that shift. Our mission today is to uncover the hidden structural differences in human performance.
Which is such a fascinating area to get into.
It really is. We're specifically looking at the massive, almost invisible gap between how elite athletes perform in a familiar practice environment versus the high-stakes pressure cooker reality of international competition.
Yeah, the environments couldn't be more different.
And to do this, we're using a truly fascinating piece of research to guide us today. So the article is titled, Analysis of the Differences Between Training Matches and International Competitions for Elite Chinese U15 Female Table Tennis Players.
Quite a mouthful, but very precise.
Very precise, yeah. It was authored by two sports scientists, Shuangying Wang and Zhang, and it was actually published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine, Volume 25, in the year 2026.
It's a remarkable piece of scientific literature, honestly, because it goes far beyond the obvious. It doesn't just ask if players perform differently under pressure. I mean, we intuitively know that they do, right?
Sure, anyone who's ever gotten nervous knows that.
Exactly. But Wang and Zhang asked how the very architecture of their game changes, like stroke by stroke, isolated down to specific geographic zones on the table.
Wow.
Yeah, and what their data reveals about optimizing human performance, well, it's applicable far beyond just the boundaries of elite table tennis.
So let's start by looking at the foundation of this study, because the data set itself is it's what makes these findings so robust. The researchers didn't just grab random footage off YouTube.
No, definitely not.
They analyzed 80 matches in total, so that's 40 training matches and 40 international competitions. And they focused on just 5 elite under 15 female players on the Chinese national youth team.
Which is a crucial detail.
Yeah, for anyone listening who maybe doesn't follow table tennis closely, it's vital to understand the caliber here. The Chinese national team is essentially the absolute pinnacle of the sport globally.
Right. We are talking about individuals who have already achieved a level of neurological and physical mastery that, frankly, most adult professionals cannot even fathom.
And they're only 14 or 15 years old.
Exactly. And the researchers controlled this data set incredibly tightly. They deliberately matched the number of wins and losses across both the training and the international data set.
Oh, so they weren't just looking at games they won.
Right. By doing that, they essentially created a perfect, hermetically sealed laboratory to isolate the effect of the environment itself. They filtered out the noise of whether a player was simply, having a fundamentally good or bad day.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline data then. Because if you just look at the surface-level statistics they gathered first, you would absolutely think the environment didn't matter at all.
It's so true.
The data really plays a trick on you here. On paper, if you look at isolated metrics, so things like the overall scoring rate, the usage rate of various grips, and the technical effectiveness of specific strokes like serves or smashes.
The basics, basically.
Right, the basics. The training matches and the international matches look virtually identical. The numbers just mirror each other almost perfectly.
Which highlights exactly why relying on isolated metrics is so incredibly dangerous for coaches, or athletes, and frankly, learners or managers in any field. Well, think about it. If a coach only looks at the fact that a player's forehand smash is, say, 50% effective in a Tuesday morning practice and 50% effective in a Sunday World Championship final, that coach will naturally conclude that their training program is perfectly aligned.
Oh, I see. They think, hey, the stats match. We're doing great.
Exactly. But performance, especially at this elite high-speed level, is never about isolated actions. A table tennis match isn't just a collection of independent swings, it's a highly complex, dynamic, interactive system.
To put that in perspective, evaluating these athletes purely on those surface-level statistics is kind of like evaluating a high-performance sports car solely by looking at its engine specs while it's strapped to a dyno in a climate-controlled garage.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, you're completely ignoring how it handles rush hour traffic in a torrential downpour. Sure, the spark plugs are firing exactly the same way. The horsepower output reads identical on the computer. The physical parts are the exact same.
But the context is completely different.
Yes. The environmental context changes the entire reality of how that machine has to operate just to survive. The garage data is practically useless if you're trying to win a chaotic street race.
And pushing that sports car analogy a step further, the garage data completely ignores the most volatile variable of all, which is the driver.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't account for the driver's elevated heart rate or their visual processing speed when a car suddenly swerves into their lane, or their grip tension on the steering wheel under severe stress.
Right, the human element.
Exactly. In table tennis, those basic baseline stats don't tell you how a player constructs a point against a live, totally unpredictable opponent who is actively trying to destroy their rhythm, an opponent trying to exploit their psychological weaknesses.
Which is precisely why Wang and Zhang realized they had to dig much deeper than traditional statistics.
Yeah.
If the swings weren't changing, the difference had to be hiding in the geometry of the game.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Which brings us to what I like to call the tactical geography. Since the basic stats of what the players were hitting didn't tell the whole story, the researchers just shifted their focus to where the ball was actually going.
Right, the placement.
Yeah, they mapped out what they termed placement to technique combinations using these highly detailed heat map visualizations.
It's brilliant.
They wanted to know exactly where the ball landed on the table and what specific technique the opponent was subsequently forced to use to return it. And the contrast between the training heat maps and the international heat maps is just staggering.
It really is. The physical geography of the table completely transforms depending on the room they are standing in.
Literally a different map.
Yeah. In the training matches, the heat maps show this massive concentration of activity in very specific zones. These elite players rely heavily on precise, short area control. They are constantly placing the ball in the middle, short and forehand short areas.
Meaning very close to the net. Right?
Exactly. Very close to the net, forcing their practice partners to step in awkwardly to reach it.
So the data highlights a massive reliance on a very specific technique called the touch short. For those listening, it's this incredibly delicate, highly finessed, control-oriented shot that just barely bounces over the net.
It requires immense touch, just incredible feel for the ball.
And the usage rate of this touch short was a full 4.2 percentage points higher in training matches. In a game defined by fractions of a second and, millimeters of spin, a 4.2% shift is a huge statistical anomaly.
Tactically speaking, leaning on that shot makes perfect sense when you are in a familiar environment.
Why is that?
Well, by keeping the ball incredibly short and tight to the net, you completely neutralize your opponent's ability to launch a full-power sweeping attack. You essentially force them into a conservative defensive return. They basically just have to bump it back over.
Okay, I follow you.
And that defensive return is exactly what you want because it sets you up to immediately take control of the point with a lethal, powerful attack on the very next shot.
Oh, it's a trap.
Exactly. It's a beautifully orchestrated, highly technical, and actually very aggressive strategy.
But then we look at the heat maps for the international competitions. And that beautiful, delicate, highly technical strategy basically evaporates into thin air.
It just disappears.
The geography of the game shifts drastically. Instead of playing short to the net, the players suddenly default to hitting deep, driving the ball into the backhand and middle-long areas of the table.
Way in the back.
Right. They completely abandon the short game and start initiating these rapid, grueling, deep backhand-to-backhand rallies. The heat maps for international matches basically just light up at the deep back edge of the table.
It's a total inversion of their practice strategy.
Now, I have to push back on this because Logically, it just feels incredibly counterintuitive,
Oh, I agree.
right? If the short control game, that touch short setup, works so brilliantly in training to trap your opponent and win points effortlessly, why on earth would they abandon it on the international stage?
Hmm.
Are these world-class athletes just getting nervous, freezing up, and totally forgetting their game plan?
It seems that way, doesn't it?
It seems entirely irrational to drop your absolute best weapon when the stakes are at their absolute highest.
It looks completely irrational until you view it through the lens of human biology. It isn't that they are suddenly forgetting their game plan or getting, amateur stage fright.
Okay, then what is it?
It's that the extreme physical and psychological reality of the international stage forces a deep biological override in the brain. To understand why they abandoned the short game, we have to look at the biomechanics mentioned in the study.
Ah, the open and close skills.
Yes. In sports science, all physical movements are generally categorized into two camps: open skills and closed skills.
So I hear the term open skill, and I instantly assume that means something creative, improvisational, or maybe just expansive. Is that what's causing the inherent risk here?
That's a really great way to look at it. A forehand stroke, especially a delicate forehand touch shot, is a classic open skill. It requires a much larger, expansive range of motion from the arm and torso.
Lots of moving parts.
Exactly. And because of those open mechanics, it can generate incredible power and highly complex spin. But the trade-off is massive.
The wrist.
Right, because the movement is so expansive and the paddle is further from your center of gravity, it carries a much higher degree of risk. It requires absolutely perfect microtiming, perfect spatial awareness, and incredibly fine motor control to execute correctly.
Okay, so what about the backhand?
The backhand, conversely, is a closed skill. The paddle stays tight, right in front of the body's center of mass. The range of motion is much smaller, far more compact, and just mechanically restricted.
So safer.
Much safer. Because of that restriction, it is inherently more stable, it can be executed with faster reaction times, and it is significantly easier to control, even when your timing is slightly off.
Oh, I see. It's like a computer going into safe mode.
Yes.
When the CPU starts overheating because there are too many complex applications running, the operating system forcibly shuts down the high-drain, complex background apps, which are the open skills, just to ensure the core operating system doesn't completely crash.
That is exactly what is happening in the nervous system. Now inject the extreme psychological pressure of an international tournament into that biological system.
Overwhelming.
Totally. You are playing in a foreign country. You are playing against an unfamiliar opponent whose specific racket spin and ball speed you haven't totally calibrated to yet. There's a massive crowd watching. The lighting is different. The stakes are career-defining.
So the cognitive load is just maxed out.
Absolutely. And under that immense cognitive load, the brain is flooded with adrenaline, which naturally degrades fine motor control. The neurological cost of executing a complex, risky, open skill like that delicate, perfect forehand touch short is simply too high.
The brain just won't let them do it.
Right. The brain calculates the risk of an unforced error and hits the biological panic button. Players instinctively fall back on simpler, more stable tactical structures. They retreat to the closed skill.
Wow.
They default to the deep backhand because their nervous system is prioritizing mechanical stability over tactical lethality in a chaotic environment.
That makes so much sense when you frame it as cognitive load. It's not a tactical mistake at all. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism playing out in real time on a ping pong table. They are optimizing for sheer survival.
Exactly. Survival first, winning second.
But this massive shift in where the ball is going, this tactical geography, it also completely changes the timeline of the match, right? It alters the fundamental rhythm of when a point is actually won or lost, shifting the researcher's focus from spatial data to temporal data.
It changes the entire chronological architecture of the game.
And here's where the data gets incredibly stark. The researchers broke down the rallies stroke by stroke chronologically to see exactly which hits carried the most mathematical weight.
Right.
In the training catches, the timeline is short and brutal. The data is clear. The first 4 strokes dictate the outcome of the point. It is entirely about early active scoring.
You serve, they return weakly because of a touch short, you attack, point over.
Yeah. It's a fast, lethal exchange, heavily reliant on that delicate control we just talked about.
But step into the international arena, and that timeline stretches out agonizingly.
How much longer?
Well, the statistical modeling proves that the strokes after the third stroke, what the researchers classify as the stalemate or the rally phase, have a drastically stronger impact on the winning probability.
Interesting.
Surviving and dominating those later grueling strokes yielded a massive statistical coefficients of 3.403 in their data.
Let's pause on that number for a second, because a coefficient of 3.403 in this kind of statistical regression model isn't just a slight edge.
No, it's massive.
It means that if you win the rally phase, your odds of winning the entire point multiply exponentially compared to winning those early opening strokes. The math basically says that surviving the stalemate becomes the absolute definitive predictor of ultimate victory.
And meanwhile, that touch-short control technique that was winning them all those fast points in the practice facility.
Right. What happens to that?
The data shows its effectiveness plummets to the point of statistical insignificance in international play. It literally stops working.
Wow. So it goes from being the main weapon to essentially useless.
Exactly. Suddenly, active, attacking-like aggressive topspin loops specifically designed to survive long, exhausting backhand rallies becomes the only mathematically viable way to stay alive. The environment no longer rewards cleverness. It demands a completely different kind of structural endurance.
It makes me think of high-level competitive chess.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
In training, these players are facing the exact same teammates every single day in a familiar, low-pressure room. Because they know each other so well, they start relying on these clever, intricate opening traps to win quickly. They go for the flashy four-move checkmate.
Right, because it works on their friends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in international play, you are facing grandmasters from around the world. Everyone at that level knows the opening traps. Nobody is falling for the four-move checkmate on the world stage.
Definitely not.
So the match is only ever won by the player who has the stamina and the processing power to survive the grueling, highly complex 50-move endgame. If you spend your entire practice solely perfecting your tricky opening, you are going to get absolutely crushed at the World Championships when the opponent forces you into deep waters.
And bridging that chess analogy back to the physical world, this temporal shift exposes a massive systemic flaw in how we approach sports training.
How so?
Well, and really how we approach preparation for any high-stakes professional endeavor. If a youth training program, even at the elite national level, overemphasizes early scoring and delicate control simply because it yields positive results in a familiar practice environment, coaches are actively doing their athletes a massive disservice.
Because they're functionally rewarding the wrong behavior.
Yeah.
They are giving positive reinforcement for a strategy that has essentially a 0% survival rate in the wild.
Precisely. They are building a physical and neurological skill set that is totally unequipped for the grueling, endurance-heavy, rally-based realities of the global stage.
That's wild.
These athletes will arrive at an international tournament perfectly physically prepared for a game that doesn't actually exist in that building.
A completely different sport, almost.
Yes, they will step up to the table looking to end points early with delicate, open skills. And when the opponent inevitably forces a deep, stressful backhand rally, they simply won't have the structural biological endurance to win the endgame.
Which is a terrifying realization if you are a coach. I mean, you think you were building a resilient champion, but your practice structure is actually building a player who is fundamentally fragile to the realities of live competition.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
But to make these kinds of bold claims, to literally tell the Chinese national team that their training structure might be fundamentally flawed, Wang and Zhang had to make sure their data was absolutely bulletproof.
And they did.
Yeah, and they did this using a very specific statistical methodology, right?
It did. The data science behind the study is honestly just as elegant as the biomechanics. They used a statistical method called generalized estimating equations, or GEE for short.
Now, if you're a data nerd listening to this, you might have immediately spotted the glaring flaw in the dataset I mentioned earlier. Taking 80 matches from only 5 players introduces a massive data bias.
Right, you can't just treat every match as unique.
Exactly. You have incredible intra-cluster correlation. Player A isn't a blank slate every time she walks up to the table. She has a specific height, a specific wingspan, and deep-seated neurological habits that will inevitably appear in all 16 of her individual matches.
And if you use traditional statistical methods like a standard ANOVA or basic regression, the software usually treats every single data point, every match, as a totally independent, isolated event.
Which is a lie, basically.
It is. It would artificially inflate your confidence in the results because the math would pretend you observed 80 totally unique players making independent choices, when in reality, you just watched 5 players repeating their own personal quirks over and over.
So how does GEE fix that?
GE mathematically controls for these repeated measures. It factors in the reality that multiple data points are clustered around the same human being.
Ah, okay.
By calculating and isolating the variance within each specific player, GEE ensures that the final findings aren't just a reflection of one player's weird backhand habit, but are actually robust population average truths about how elite human performance fundamentally shifts.
It acts like a highly sophisticated audio filter, scrubbing out the static noise of individual human quirks to find the pure universal signal of how the architecture of the game actually changes.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, what makes this paper so compelling is that it isn't just an abstract mathematical exercise meant to, sit on a university library shelf. Wang and Zhang actually included a brilliant case study in the paper showing exactly how this GE-backed data can be weaponized in real time.
The player A versus player B scenario. It is a perfect demonstration of applied data science.
So picture this. Player A is at a major international tournament. She plays her first match against player B and loses 2-3.
It's a tight loss, but she still lost.
Right. Now, before this kind of granular data analysis existed, a coach's advice between matches would be entirely qualitative. They might just say, try harder, focus more, keep your eye on the ball, trust your training.
Right, the usual sports cliches.
Exactly, platitudes. But instead of relying on that, they used the heat maps to objectively analyze the placement technique combinations from that specific painful loss.
And the heat map immediately stripped away the emotion of the loss. It revealed exactly the geographic zones where player A was bleeding points.
The actual geography of the failure.
Exactly. And more importantly, it highlighted the specific structural pattern that player B was vulnerable to when subjected to high-pressure international environment conditions.
They looked at the data and realized that in the international context, forcing the backhand rally wasn't just a survival mechanism, it was the key to breaking the opponent.
So she adapts.
Yes. Player A completely throws out her comfortable training tactics and adjusts her strategy for the second match against the exact same opponent. She actively forces the ball deep into the backhand-dominant rally zones, deliberately utilizing that closed skill stability we talked about.
Embracing the stalemate.
Embracing the stalemate. And the result of just shifting the geometry. She wins the second match, 3-0. An absolute dominant shutout.
She changed the structural geometry of the match to favor the mathematical realities of international play rather than relying on what felt comfortable or what worked back home in the training facility.
So what is the ultimate takeaway here? It means this paper is essentially a literal cheat sheet. It is an applied, data-driven tool that coaches can use to make mid-tournament or even mid-match structural adjustments that can literally alter the outcome of world-class sporting events.
It is, but taking it a step further, it forces a reckoning with how daily training must evolve. The study doesn't just point out the vulnerability, it synthesizes very clear, actionable recommendations. Training environments must artificially, deliberately simulate the physiological demands of international play.
You literally have to bring the chaotic rush hour traffic onto the pristine test track.
Exactly that. Coaches shouldn't just run isolated low-pressure technique drills where a player hits 100 perfect touch shots in a totally silent room.
Because that doesn't exist in reality.
Right. The data says they need to add unpredictable crowd noise over loudspeakers to artificially spike the player's cognitive load and mimic psychological pressure. They need to purposefully design grueling drills that force players into deep backhand stalemates over and over again, pushing them past their physical limits so they build the biological and tactical endurance required for the endgame.
That makes total sense.
They have to prioritize what the researchers call offensive initiation transitions, which really just means dedicating practice time to learning how to survive a chaotic, terrifying rally and turn it back into an attack, rather than just practicing the perfect attack from a dead stop.
It is entirely about aligning the structural design of your Tuesday morning practice with the exact psychological, biological, and tactical demands of the Sunday afternoon championship final.
Recognizing that those two distinct environments require entirely different physiological and strategic responses from the human body, the environment dictates the tactic. If you ignore the environment, your tactic, no matter how flawlessly executed in isolation, is mathematically doomed to fail.
Which leaves us with a really powerful, somewhat uncomfortable thought for you listening right now to carry forward into your week. We've just seen how the intense psychological pressure of an international audience forces even the most elite, technically gifted table tennis players on earth to abandon their complex, delicate training.
They just have to let it go.
Yeah, their brains force them to fall back on safer, simpler backhand rallies. They default to the closed skill, the stable structure, just to survive the sheer chaos of the moment.
Which is human nature.
So, think about your own life for a second. When the pressure is really on in your career, during a crucial presentation to a board, or even in a highly difficult personal conversation, where are you defaulting to your own version of a backhand rally?
That's a great question.
What is the safe, simple, closed skill structure you instinctively retreat to when the cognitive load gets too heavy? And more importantly, is your daily practice, your daily routine, actually preparing you for the grueling, complex realities of those high-pressure endgames? Or are you just comfortably practicing the easy wins in an empty room, assuming it will all somehow translate?
Because the data proves it won't.
It really won't. If you want to look at the actual heat maps and see exactly how the geometry of world-class performance shifts millimeter by millimeter under pressure, I highly encourage you to read the full article, Analysis of the Differences Between Training Matches and International Competitions for Elite Chinese U15 Female Table Tennis Players by Wang and Zhang. It's an incredible look into the deep data science of sports.
Highly recommend checking it out.
And if you want to keep exploring the hidden structural forces behind how the world actually works, make sure to follow the channel and turn on notifications for more deep dives into fascinating academic research.